The world is once again holding its breath. Tensions between Iran and the United States are rising, and many experts believe we are closer to a major confrontation than most people realize. What makes this moment especially dangerous is not just open threats, but the silence, the signals, and the strategic moves happening behind the scenes. Iran has long been a central figure in Middle Eastern politics, but recent developments have pushed the situation into a more fragile and unpredictable phase. Military exercises, missile tests, and strong public statements from Iranian leadership have drawn intense attention from Washington. At the same time, the United States has increased its military presence in key areas, sending a clear message that it is prepared to respond if necessary. This is not simply about one disagreement. It is the result of decades of mistrust, broken negotiations, and conflicting interests. Iran views U.S. influence in the Middle East as a direct threat to its sovereignty and regional ambitions. The United States, on the other hand, sees Iran's nuclear program, regional alliances, and military capabilities as a serious risk to global security and its own national interests. What makes the situation even more alarming is how quickly things can escalate. Modern warfare does not always begin with formal declarations. A drone strike, a naval incident, or a misinterpreted military movement can trigger a chain reaction that leaders may struggle to control. History has shown that wars often start not by plan, but by accident. For Americans, this is not a distant issue. Any conflict involving Iran could disrupt global oil supplies, impact fuel prices, and shake financial markets. Beyond economics, there are serious security concerns. U.S. military bases, allies, and trade routes across the Middle East could become targets, drawing the United States deeper into a prolonged and costly conflict. Meanwhile, ordinary people are caught in the middle. Iranian civilians live under constant uncertainty, facing economic pressure, sanctions, and the fear of violence. At the same time, American families may feel the consequences through rising costs, political instability, and the possibility of another long foreign conflict. Diplomatic efforts continue, but trust is thin. Each side questions the other's intentions. Every statement is analyzed. Every move is watched. The margin for error is shrinking, and the consequences of a mistake are growing larger. This moment is critical. The choices made now could lead to renewed negotiations and stability, or push the region toward chaos and war. The world is watching closely because what happens between Iran and the United States will not stay contained. In the next part, we will examine how this tension began. We will look at the key historical events, failed agreements, and turning points that brought both nations to this dangerous crossroads. To understand why the current situation feels so dangerous, we need to look back. The tension between Iran and the United States did not appear overnight. It is the result of decades of political conflict, mistrust, and missed opportunities for cooperation. Each chapter of this history added another layer of suspicion, making today's crisis harder to diffuse. The relationship between the two countries changed dramatically in 1979. Before that year, Iran and the United States were strategic partners. That partnership collapsed with the Iranian Revolution, when a new government came to power with a strong anti-American stance. The U.S. embassy hostage crisis that followed left a deep scar on American political memory and reshaped how Washington viewed Iran from that point forward. In the years that followed, communication between the two nations became rare and hostile. Sanctions replaced diplomacy, military threats replaced dialogue. Iran, feeling isolated and pressured, focused on strengthening its independence and regional influence. The United States, concerned about stability in the Middle East, worked to limit Iran's power through economic and political pressure. One of the most critical turning points was Iran's nuclear program. Iran has consistently claimed that its nuclear efforts are for civilian and energy purposes. The United States and its allies, however, have long feared that the program could be used to develop nuclear weapons. This disagreement became the center of international negotiations, sanctions, and global concern. In 2015, a breakthrough appeared possible. A nuclear agreement was reached that limited Iran's nuclear activities in exchange for sanctions relief. For a brief moment, tensions eased, and many believed a new chapter was beginning. But that moment did not last. The agreement became politically controversial, and trust on both sides remained fragile. When the deal collapsed, tensions quickly returned. Sanctions were reimposed. Iran responded by expanding parts of its nuclear program. Each move by one side was met with a countermove by the other. The cycle of pressure and resistance resumed, this time with even less trust than before. At the same time, regional conflicts added fuel to the fire. Iran's involvement in neighboring countries, support for allied groups, and growing influence across the Middle East alarmed Washington and its partners. The United States viewed these actions as destabilizing, while Iran saw them as necessary for its security and survival. Over time, the space for calm discussion narrowed. Direct communication became rare. Messages were sent through intermediaries, often distorted or delayed. In such an environment, misunderstandings become more likely and restraint becomes harder to maintain. This history explains why today's situation feels so fragile. It is not just about one policy or one leader. It is about years of unresolved conflict and accumulated distrust. Every new crisis is shaped by everything that came before it. In the next part, we will look at the present-day flashpoints. We will examine the specific actions, warnings, and incidents that are pushing tensions higher right now, and why many analysts believe the risk of escalation has never been more serious. Today's tension is being driven by a series of flashpoints that are unfolding almost simultaneously. These are not isolated events. Together, they form a dangerous pattern where pressure is building faster than diplomacy can keep up. Each development increases the chance that a limited incident could turn into a wider confrontation. One major flashpoint is military presence. The United States maintains forces across the Middle East, including naval units in critical waterways. Iran closely monitors these movements and often responds with its own military exercises. These actions are meant to signal strength, but they also increase the risk of accidents. When heavily armed forces operate in close proximity, even a small miscalculation can escalate rapidly. Another key issue is Iran's nuclear activity. Reports of increased uranium enrichment and reduced cooperation with international inspectors have raised alarm in Washington. From the U.S. perspective, these steps shorten the timeline for potential weapon capability. From Iran's perspective, they are leverage, a response to economic pressure and broken promises. This difference in interpretation fuels mutual suspicion and hardens positions on both sides. Sanctions remain a powerful source of tension. The Iranian economy continues to suffer under heavy restrictions, affecting daily life for millions of people. Inflation, currency instability, and limited access to global markets have created intense internal pressure. Iranian leaders argue that these conditions justify stronger responses abroad. U.S. policymakers, meanwhile, see sanctions as necessary tools to limit Iran's behavior without direct military action. Regional conflicts add another layer of danger. Iran's relationships with allied groups across the Middle East are closely watched by the United States. Any attack linked to these networks can quickly draw blame, whether or not Iran directly ordered it. This creates a situation where retaliation can occur based on perception rather than confirmed facts. Technology has also changed the nature of escalation. Drones, cyber operations, and precision strikes allow actions to be taken quickly and quietly. While this reduces the need for large-scale invasions, it increases uncertainty. When attribution is unclear, leaders may act on incomplete information, increasing the risk of mistakes. Public rhetoric is becoming sharper. Statements from officials on both sides are closely analyzed by media and military planners. Strong language may play well domestically, but it reduces room for compromise. Once expectations are set publicly, backing down becomes politically costly. What makes this moment especially unstable is the lack of reliable communication. Direct channels are limited, and messages often pass through intermediaries. Delays and misinterpretations are common. In a crisis, hours can matter, and confusion can be deadly. All of these flashpoints are connected. Military movements influence political decisions. Sanctions affect strategic calculations. Regional events trigger global reactions. The system is tightly wound, and pressure continues to build. In the next part, we will examine how allies and rival powers are responding. We will look at the role of regional partners, global powers, and why their involvement could either prevent escalation or make the situation far more dangerous. The growing tension between Iran and the United States does not exist in isolation. It is deeply influenced by the actions and interests of allies and rival powers across the world. These external players can either help contain the crisis or unintentionally push it toward escalation. Their involvement adds complexity, pressure, and uncertainty to an already fragile situation. U.S. allies in the Middle East play a significant role. Countries that rely on American security guarantees closely monitor Iran's actions and often urge Washington to take a firm stance. They view Iran's military capabilities and regional influence as direct threats to their stability. This support strengthens U.S. resolve, but it also narrows diplomatic options. When allies feel threatened, compromise becomes politically harder to justify. At the same time, some regional actors fear the consequences of open conflict. A full-scale war would disrupt trade, energy supplies, and internal security. These countries often push quietly for de-escalation, even while publicly aligning with U.S. positions. This split approach reflects the difficult balance between security concerns and economic survival. Beyond the region, global powers are watching closely. Some see the crisis as a chance to expand their influence. They may offer Iran economic partnerships, diplomatic backing, or military cooperation, reducing the impact of U.S. pressure. This support gives Iran alternatives and makes sanctions less effective, but it also raises concerns in Washington about shifting power dynamics. Europe plays a more cautious role. European governments generally prefer diplomacy and stability, fearing that conflict would damage global markets and energy security. They often act as intermediaries, trying to keep communication channels open. However, their influence is limited when trust between Washington and Tehran is low. International organizations add another layer of tension. Reports, inspections, and official statements can quickly change the political atmosphere. A single negative assessment can trigger new sanctions or military warnings. While these institutions aim to reduce risk, their findings are often interpreted through political lenses. Media coverage amplifies every development. Headlines travel faster than facts, shaping public opinion and political pressure. Leaders must respond not only to events on the ground, but also to how those events are perceived by voters and allies. This constant scrutiny reduces flexibility and increases the risk of reactive decision-making. The result is a crowded and unstable environment. Multiple actors with different goals are influencing the same crisis. Some push for restraint, others benefit from confrontation, and many are simply trying to protect their own interests. Coordinating these competing pressures is extremely difficult. As more players become involved, the margin for error shrinks. A move intended as deterrence can be seen as provocation. A defensive action can be interpreted as preparation for attack. In such conditions, misunderstanding is almost inevitable. In the next part, we will focus on the economic dimension of this crisis. We will examine how energy markets, sanctions, and financial pressure are shaping decisions on both sides, and why economic stress can be just as dangerous as military force. Economic pressure is one of the most powerful forces shaping the current standoff between Iran and the United States. While military action captures headlines, financial strain often determines how long a crisis can last and how far leaders are willing to go. In this conflict, economics is not a background issue, it is a central battlefield. Sanctions have placed enormous stress on Iran's economy. Restrictions on banking, energy exports, and international trade have reduced government revenue and weakened the national currency. Inflation has risen, purchasing power has fallen, and daily life has become more difficult for ordinary people. This internal pressure creates urgency for Iranian leadership to find leverage, whether through diplomacy or strategic escalation. From the U.S. perspective, sanctions are designed to limit Iran's options without triggering direct war. The goal is to force behavioral change by increasing economic cost. However, prolonged pressure can also produce unintended results. Instead of pushing compromise, it can strengthen hardline positions and reduce trust in negotiations. Global energy markets are highly sensitive to this conflict. Iran sits near critical shipping routes, and any disruption can quickly affect oil supply. Even the threat of conflict can drive prices higher. For American consumers, this can mean rising fuel costs and increased inflation. For the global economy, uncertainty reduces investment and slows growth. Businesses and financial institutions react cautiously. Risk premiums rise, insurance costs increase, and trade routes are reassessed. These changes ripple outward, affecting countries far from the Middle East. What begins as a regional dispute can quietly evolve into a worldwide economic concern. Inside Iran, economic strain also affects political stability. Public frustration grows when basic goods become expensive or scarce. Leaders must balance external resistance with internal control. This pressure pushes decision-makers toward actions meant to project strength abroad to maintain authority at home. The U.S. also faces economic considerations. Prolonged instability can strain defense budgets and complicate domestic policy priorities. Lawmakers must weigh foreign policy goals against public fatigue with long overseas engagements. Economic consequences influence political debate and shape public opinion. Another hidden consequence is adaptation. Over time, economies adjust. Iran seeks alternative trade partners and financial channels. These adjustments reduce the long-term impact of sanctions and shift global economic relationships. While this provides short-term relief, it can weaken traditional financial systems and increase global fragmentation. Economic pressure does not operate in isolation. It interacts with military planning, diplomacy, and public messaging. A rise in oil prices can change political calculations. A sudden economic shock can accelerate negotiations or harden resistance. This makes the current moment especially volatile. Financial stress increases urgency, but it does not guarantee resolution. Instead, it raises the stakes of every decision. Leaders must act under pressure, with limited room for error. In the next part, we will examine the role of communication and miscommunication. We will explore how messaging, media narratives, and the absence of direct dialogue increase the risk of misunderstanding and accidental escalation.
One of the most dangerous aspects of the current crisis is not firepower or economics, but communication. Or more accurately, the lack of it. When nations that distrust each other stop speaking directly, every message becomes a puzzle, and every action is open to interpretation. This is where small events can grow into major disasters. Direct communication between Iran and the United States is extremely limited. Messages are often delivered through intermediaries, informal channels, or public statements. Each step in that chain increases the chance of distortion. Tone, intent, and urgency can be misunderstood, especially when filtered through political agendas or media narratives. Public statements play a powerful role. Leaders use strong language to signal resolve to domestic audiences and allies. These statements are meant to deter, but they can also lock leaders into positions that are difficult to reverse. Once a threat is made publicly, backing down can be seen as weakness, even if de-escalation would be the safer option. Media coverage accelerates this problem. Headlines simplify complex events, often emphasizing confrontation over nuance. Social media spreads reactions instantly, long before full information is available. Decision-makers are forced to respond quickly, sometimes before facts are confirmed. Speed replaces caution, and perception begins to outweigh reality. Military signaling is another form of communication, and it is especially risky. Troop movements, drills, and deployments are intended to send clear messages, but clarity is not guaranteed. A defensive exercise can be interpreted as preparation for attack. A routine patrol can be seen as provocation. In high-tension environments, intent is often assumed rather than verified. Technology adds to the uncertainty. Cyber operations, surveillance, and unmanned systems operate in shadows. When something goes wrong, attribution can be unclear. Leaders may not know who acted, why, or whether an incident was intentional. This ambiguity shortens decision time and increases pressure to respond forcefully. History shows that many conflicts began with misunderstandings rather than deliberate plans. When trust is low, leaders assume the worst. They prepare for escalation, even when the other side may be seeking leverage rather than war. This creates a self-reinforcing cycle of suspicion. Internal politics further complicate communication. Hardline voices often dominate public debate, especially during crises. Calls for restraint can be framed as weakness. Leaders must navigate not only international risks, but also domestic expectations and political survival. In this environment, silence can be just as dangerous as threats. When communication breaks down completely, there is no way to clarify intent or slow momentum. Events begin to drive decisions rather than strategy guiding events. This is why the current moment is so fragile. The tools to prevent escalation exist, but they require trust, patience, and political courage. Without them, the risk of accidental conflict continues to rise. In the final part, we will look ahead. We will examine possible outcomes, from renewed diplomacy to open conflict, and what each path could mean for the United States, the Middle East, and the wider world.
The path forward is uncertain, and that uncertainty is what makes this moment so critical. Several outcomes are possible, and each one carries serious consequences. What happens next will depend on choices made quietly behind closed doors, as well as reactions to events that may unfold without warning. One possible path is renewed diplomacy. This would require both sides to step back from maximum pressure and recognize the cost of continued escalation. Limited agreements, confidence-building measures, or indirect negotiations could reduce immediate risk. This path would not resolve every disagreement, but it could slow momentum toward conflict and reopen channels of communication. History shows that even small diplomatic steps can prevent large disasters. Another possibility is prolonged tension without open war. In this scenario, sanctions, military posturing, cyber activity, and proxy conflicts continue. This may appear stable on the surface, but it is inherently dangerous. Over time, fatigue, misjudgment, or a single unexpected incident could break the balance. Long standoffs often end not with peace, but with sudden escalation. The most dangerous outcome is direct military conflict. This would not be limited or contained. Any exchange of force could rapidly expand across the region, drawing in allies and disrupting global systems. Shipping routes could be threatened, energy markets shaken, and civilian populations placed at risk. For the United States, this could mean long-term military involvement, economic strain, and political consequences at home. Iran also faces enormous risks. Infrastructure damage, economic collapse, and internal instability would likely follow open conflict. Even if leaders believe confrontation strengthens their position, the long-term costs could be severe and irreversible. What makes this moment different from the past is speed. Decisions are made faster, information spreads instantly, and pressure builds in real time. There is less room for delay, reflection, or correction. A crisis can escalate in hours, not months. Public attention will shape these outcomes. When people understand the stakes, leaders face pressure to act responsibly. When fear and misinformation dominate, space for calm decision-making shrinks. Awareness does not guarantee peace, but ignorance almost guarantees mistakes. This is why the current situation matters beyond headlines. It is not only about Iran or the Middle East, it is about how global power is managed in an era of constant tension. It is about whether restraint can still compete with force. The choices made now will echo for years. The world is watching, markets are reacting, and lives hang in the balance. The story is still being written, and its ending has not yet been decided.